Anticipated removal of adverse consumer credit information, which finally came into force on the 1st of April, has been largely welcomed. Millions of consumers across the country have confirmed that they have been eagerly waiting for this day of receiving a pardon for the credit sins and starting afresh, with high hopes of once again being able to access much-needed credit. Consumers are being urged to access their credit records and check if their defaults and paid-up judgments have in fact been removed. It is also during this period that the consumers can lodge the complaints if they find that the information has not been removed as it should have. According to Credit Ombudsman Manie Van Schalkwyk, the regulations that has been debated over the past years are now seeing the real effects of removing adverse information from consumers' profile, as well as the effect on the credit industry as a whole. According to the National Credit Regulator's Credit Bureau Monitor statistics, close to half of the recorded 21 million consumers have impaired credit records. This ranges from consumers with defaults, judgments, admin orders, as well as consumers who are 3 months or more in areas with their account payments.
The consumers are heavily indebted. They don't have the ability to take on a lot more debt. And of course, there's a lot more uncertainty. One just has to consider the level of unemployment. Everybody knows somebody who's lost a job and can't find another. This is a sad fact of life in South Africa. All this says that the outlook for banks as a start mean lower credit's going to be offered because lower is being requested, and those who are wanting credit most are the ones who probably aren't going to get it because they're already too hocked up to the hilt.
According to analysts, what people really need to grasp is that not all of the 9.8 million consumers with impaired records will benefit from this exercise.
We are seeing an increase of people who are coming to us for assistance, but the problem is that there is no solution really for people who have no income or whose income has dropped so much that they cannot afford debt counseling. Because the problem is that if you are retrenched, even if you had savings, a lot of people run out of the savings because they can't find a job quick enough.
In the lead up to 1 April, there have been many misconceptions regarding exactly who will benefit, what information will be removed, and even when it was going to be implemented. The adverse information reflected on consumers' profiles at 1 April will be removed irrespective of whether it was paid or not. When it comes to judgment information, the regulation stipulates that the capital amount owed in terms of the judgment must be paid. Only paid-up judgments which were taken between 2009 and 2014 before 1 April will be removed as part of the removal of adverse consumer credit information exercise. Older judgments should have been removed already due to the maximum retention period of 5 years. There is no process that consumers need to follow. However, consumers are urged to access their credit records after this period and to check if defaults and paid-up judgments have in fact been removed. Consumers can contact the Office of the Credit Ombudsman for free assistance should they find themselves being relisted after the removal of adverse consumer credit information rollout, or if they find that information that was supposed to be removed has not been removed by the cut-off date. The Office of the Credit Ombudsman can be contacted on 0861 662837, or you can visit the website on www.creditombudsman.org.za.
Now joining us in the studio to unpack the Credit Information Amnesty is Credit Ombudsman Manie Van Schalkwyk. Welcome to the show, Manie.
Hello, Tawile.
Now, before we unpack this Credit Information Amnesty, can you just quickly take us through the mandate of the Credit Ombudsman?
Good, thank you. The Credit Ombudsman is an independent organization which assists consumers in 2 areas. If you've got a problem on your credit record, number one, and number two, in terms of a credit transaction, what we will do free of charge is do an investigation on your behalf and then make a decision whether the information should be removed from the credit bureau or was there really something wrong in the credit transaction. That is our first big mandate. Okay. And the second mandate is we do a lot of consumer education where we provide information to consumers on the importance of keeping a clean credit record or a healthy credit record, and maybe we can talk about that a bit later. And number two, how to conduct your credit, how to budget, and look at the peripherals around credit information and make sure that people get that information.
All right. Now, in terms of this Credit Information Amnesty, I mean, it's been touted as quite a brave step into a new credit era. Would you agree?
Yes, and I think maybe we should look at what people call a credit amnesty because it does create some problems. But what it really meant is that there's a removal of credit information in certain aspects of your credit profile. And I think the insert talked about it, but if your judgments were paid up,
Yes.
Usually that information would have remained on the credit bureau for a period of 5 years.
Yes.
Now that information is removed if it's been paid. So that is very important to understand. And not only for now. So although the amnesty, or so-called amnesty, looked at it, even going forward, if you have paid up a judgment, what the court, the Act has made provision for, is you don't have to go back to court for a rescission of judgment. You can now, when the paid up, the debt has been paid up, that information will be removed from a credit bureau. So that is point number one.
Okay.
Point number two, which I think is very important, is that all default information or information which was in a default section in your credit profile was removed.
Okay.
As part of this so-called amnesty. Going forward, what it also means is if you repay your debt and you have been listed on a credit bureau and you repay your debt, then that information will automatically going forward be removed from the bureau.
Okay, now initially when the credit information came across, I think people were slightly confused with, is it removed completely in the sense that if I'm applying for a loan and they need to check my credit record, so there's nothing that shows that I've defaulted or that I was a slow payer, so is it completely removed?
No, and I think
Okay,
you're touching on a very important point. And we found during our complaints there are two areas which I think there are massive confusion in this removal of information. As the first one is people think their debt has been excused.
Yes.
And that is definitely not the case.
Okay.
So if you have got debt and you are not repaying it, you're going to get more problems going forward. So that people need to remember.
Yeah.
The second thing is what you touched on, is that only certain parts of information have been removed in your credit profile. And there's a very important section called the payment profile information, and that captures how you repay your debt every month. So whether you owe Edgar's or Jet or Lewis stores, on a monthly basis, 57 million accounts are getting updated to the credit bureaus on how you paid. Now that information remains on the credit bureau.
Okay.
So if you people think they will just automatically have access to credit again, that is not totally true. Credit providers will use that information to access, to see if you have been in arrears, and if you were, they may or may not provide you with credit.
Now, some debt collectors are reportedly, still hounding people for money and that sort of thing. What can consumers do now that, judgments are being cleared? How does it work in terms of debt collectors getting their money and also not bothering consumers now that they've paid up?
I think we need to make a distinction between debt which is before a judgment and debt which is after a judgment. Before a judgment, debt can prescribe, and the new National Credit Amendments Act makes provision, and there's a specific section that deals with prescription. Although if a judgment was taken, it interrupts prescription for a duration of 30 years. So a credit provider can actually carry on trying to collect on that money. They can put a garnish on your salary, they can repossess your house, they can repossess your furniture, etc., to recoup that money. So they still got the right after judgment for 30 years to exercise a right to get the money back.
Now, how does the consumer find out if they have been removed or if the adverse information about them has been removed on their credit record?
Okay, and I think you're touching all the valuable points in terms of this amnesty, is that it's an automatic removal. So, firstly, all the default information, whether you paid it or not, again, will be removed. So that was automatic. In terms of the judgments, credit providers, paid up judgments, automatic removal. But there could be judgments out there where the credit provider, for some reason, was not necessarily sure. Maybe you repaid the attorneys or something. And it not prove that judgment was paid. So consumers can check as from tomorrow whether there's any information still available. Please, if they need to go to the credit bureaus, they are, and maybe go to our website, and we will give you to a link. Our office, unfortunately, cannot give access to credit profiles. But we will give you the right direction where to go. But go and get your credit profile. Remember, it's free of charge once a year. And see if the information is on. And if it's on and it shouldn't be, then you must make the credit bureau aware of it. You can allow 20 working days for them to investigate it. And if you're not happy after that 20 days, then you come to us. And remember, it's a free of charge service.
Okay, now let's take a look at the National Credit Amendment Bill. Can you just take us through the purpose of it?
Well, I think the reason for the bill, which is now an act, is that there were some hiccups in the original National Credit Act. And you know, it's sometimes that you don't foresee these things. And in various sections now, the National Credit Amendment Act have tried to fix the original act in various categories, which I think is a very positive way forward.
Yes.
To say, well, now we know where the niggly points are, and we fixed it.
We know in 2007 there was a similar amnesty to this one. What are the differences and what changes have they brought about to ensure that this amnesty actually sticks and that credit providers also follow it?
Yes. Well, in 2007, there was not a general removal of information. There was specific information in categories, and then there was only, if you had not more than 2 judgments, only that will remove. So there were various rules that needed to be in place, where I think the removal of information on this project was a blanket removal of all negative information in a default section, number one, and then the paid-up judgments. And I think positively, in terms of a rescindment of judgment, I think it's very positive that consumers don't have to go back to court and spend more money, which they don't have.
Yes, because the reason why they're in debt is because they don't have money.
To get the information off. And I think another positive thing for me with the removal of information is that sometimes this credit information is used for employment purposes.
Yes.
And I think, you know, that helps in terms of that as well.
Okay, I'm glad that you mentioned some of the positives in terms of removing the information. But the reason why credit providers, for example, would take a consumer to court is because they were perhaps irresponsible. How is this going to, or are there measures rather, to help consumers not get into the same debt? What are those measures that have been put in place?
There are significant measures put in place in terms of affordability assessments that the credit providers need to exercise before they provide credit. And obviously the Act makes provision for reckless lending. So if a credit provider is guilty of reckless lending, there's the consequences is quite significant of that. I also need to say, and I know sometimes people struggle to budget, and we're looking at a car that we really can't afford, but there's also a large portion of consumers which are defaulting because of something that happened in their life. You know, they had a death in the family, the breadwinner died, or is on strike on the Marikana.
It's 4 months.
Exactly. Yeah. So people die. So there are circumstances where people get retrenched. There are circumstances sometimes beyond people's control, which then force them into a debt situation. But it's not always on a permanent basis. You know, people recover after a while.
Yes.
And I think the information then makes provision for a recovery into the credit field as well.
Now, just to wrap it up, what advice can you give to consumers on how to manage their debt successfully? Because we know that South Africa has some of the highest debt levels, you know, even in the world. So what advice can you give to consumers?
Well, I think if I can take it one step back, and my advice is go and find out what is on your credit bureau profile. People are sometimes scared and they say, but we're not sure what to expect. If you don't know, then you can't fix it. And we need to know, because sometimes mistakes do happen and people do put wrong information on there for some reason. It's systems. So go and find out what it is. It's free of charge. Make the effort. It doesn't take too long. And understand what is on your credit profile, because it will save you a lot of money. Because people make decisions based on that, and they will charge you interest rates because of the information. And maybe there's something slightly wrong, which indicates that you need to pay a higher interest rate, which you can prevent. If you take a bond over 20 years, you will pay for 20 years a higher interest rate because you didn't check. Go and check your credit profile and become familiar, and get it every year. Make sure that your information, your credit profile is correct.
One last question from probably, you know, an average consumer. If I applied for a loan yesterday, or last week, for example, and they said they couldn't grant it to me, if I go apply tomorrow, they should grant it to me. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. No, the payment profile information is there, and the credit provider will still exercise an affordability assessment on the one hand, and on the other hand, look at the risk and make a decision whether they will grant you the credit.
So it's still the discretion of
Absolutely.
the credit provider?
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time.
You are welcome. Thank you so much.
That was Credit Ombudsman Manie Van Schalkwyk talking to us about the Credit Information Amnesty.